Go ahead, Lee. You're muted.
Sorry, I was
There you go.
muted. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lee. I am an alcoholic and an addict of many varieties. I have recovered from that hopeless condition and have had a spiritual awakening as the result of taking all 12 steps in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sobriety date is July 8th, 2011. I live in New England in the state of Connecticut with my partner and two dogs and a cat. And I'd like to thank David for inviting me to share and participate in this workshop. And I'd like to thank the Southeast Asia Group for hosting and providing this space for us all to get together. Thanks, Rob, for taking the host duties. And thank you, everyone, for participating and coming together. I look forward to learning from all of you as well. And I will pass it to my friend David.
All right. Thank you so much. Can you hear me, guys? Awesome. Okay. My name is David Green. I am an alcoholic addict of many sorts. Been given the gift of recovery since August 8th of 1994. I live in Oklahoma in the USA. Very grateful to be here. First, I want to thank a loving God always for recovery today and since that time. And I definitely want to thank the Southeast Asia group for hosting this meeting and putting this on. My good friend Lee, who I've invited to come and do this with me. It's a workshop for all fellowships, not just one. I've been through the book as outlined in the big book. I've made all of my amends, and I practice 10, 11, and 12 as a new way to live today. The reason that we wanted to take a look at these chapters in the back, they're not so much that they're the lost chapters, but I think they're forgotten. In a lot of meetings I go to, we only go up to chapter 7 in the big book. And there's so much more. There is so much more to practice in the principles and all of our affairs found in these later chapters. And the wives is a beautiful chapter for us to begin today. So, I'm just very grateful to be here to be a part of this. And we're going to kick this thing off today. And, we're just going to kind of take a line by line, in depth look at the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. We want to see how we've been defeated by the self. If alcohol is the problem, we just need to drink and there shouldn't be more problem, right? If drugs, acting out, lust, eating, whatever that may be, we just need to quit that and we should be okay. But the problem with a lot of, if you're like me, is once we stop those things, then something else shows up and is very angry, it's mad, it's fearful, it's worried. And the next thing you know, I fall back into old behavior patterns one more time, and then relapse is sure to follow. And I've found that definitely true in my life over and over and over. So we definitely, we just want to take an in-depth look at these chapters the same way we do the first 7. And that way we can gain a better understanding of the big book. Now, these are chapters we have learned that are after the spiritual experience has occurred. The first 7 steps brings us into a way of living, a spiritual awakening as the result of the steps. And these are the chapters that show us how to live afterwards. And so, as I've said, there's a lot of good nuggets here. There was a lot of controversy in the early days. Bill had considered Ann, Dr. Bob's wife, to write this chapter. And then there was some frustration with his wife, Lois, as to who would write the chapter. And so Bill is the one who ended up writing the chapter. Like any good alcoholic, he wanted the credit. And for me, I've been the same way in my life. That's why you will see Lee's name appeared first on the flyer. That's not like me, honestly. Without a result of the steps, I would be the one wanting to steal the show. And she will be the one to share first. And that's the way that we will do it. And it's just really good. We will look at a lot of good stuff here. So I'm going to read. We're going to zone in today just on the first 4 paragraphs. There is so much there that it will take our time to discuss all of this line by line, really break it down, really go into a deep, deep dive of the big book. So I'm going to read those, and then I'm going to pass it over to my friend Lee to break them down, to share her experience, strength, and hope. She'll pass it back to me to do the same. And then after 40 minutes, we will open it up for, questions or more so experience, strength, and hope from you guys. And one thing I always like to say at any of these workshops before we begin, if we say something here that was not given to you by your sponsor's correct. He's or she is the one that you need to listen to. And we're just two people that have come together, recovered by the grace of God, to share our experience, strength, and hope. We're not the ultimate authority here. A loving God is. So let me kick that off. Chapter to the wives, chapter 8. Now, if you'll notice, there's an asterisk right there, and I always want to pay attention to those. Anytime I see those in the book, it's important for me to go read those. So if you'll drop to the bottom of the page, mine says, yours may be a little different depending on your edition, but it says, written in 1939, where there were few women in AA, this chapter assumes that the alcoholic in the home is likely to be the husband. We know today that's not the truth, but then it was most likely. But many of the suggestions given here may be adapted to help the person who lives with a woman alcoholic, whether she is still drinking or, key words here, recovering in AA. Now, I'll get into a little more of that into my story as we go. But a further source of help is noted on page 121. So if you get a chance, definitely go look at that. We're not going to do that this morning. I'm going to start back at the top of the page where it says, with few exceptions, our book thus far has spoken of men, but what we have said applies quite as much to women. Our activities in behalf of women who drink are on the increase. There is every evidence that women regain their health as readily as men if they try our suggestions. But for every man who drinks, others are involved. The wife who trembles in fear of the next debauch, the mother and father who sees their son wasting away. Among us are wives, relatives, and friends whose problem has been solved, as well as some who have not yet found a happy solution. We want the wives of Alcoholics Anonymous to address the wives of the men who drink too much. What they say will apply to nearly everyone by the ties of blood or affection to an alcoholic. As wives of Alcoholics Anonymous, we would like you to feel that we understand as perhaps few can. We want to analyze mistakes we have made. We want to leave you with a feeling that no situation is too difficult and no unhappiness is too great to overcome. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to my friend Lee. And when she is finished, she'll pass it back as well. Thank you all for coming out here. Good to see you.
Thank you, David. The chapter to the wives, when they introduce this, on the surface level, a lot of me included, well, I'm not a wife, or I was a wife, this doesn't apply to me. But, it certainly does. And I love where it says, for every man who drinks, there are others who are involved. And, David has pointed this out in the past. When we go back to page 18, it says, if a person has cancer, all are sorry for him, and no one is angry or hurt, but not so with the alcoholic illness. For with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. And that statement, is echoed in this first few paragraphs that David read. As an alcoholic and addict, I really don't like to to look at this description of me and how all of my addictions and their attendant behaviors affected the people around me. For every man who drinks, others are involved. I don't live in a vacuum. I don't, participate in my addictions and think I'm only hurting me. Maybe if I do think that, I'm under the illusion and under a definite delusion. As the wife and partner of an alcoholic, I certainly can appreciate that. As the daughter of an alcoholic, my life was certainly touched by the sufferer. And then as the addict and alcoholic, I have to look at how, my life as the sufferer has affected the people around me. And then there's good news here when it says, we want the wives to talk to other wives, but as the wives are speaking to me, they're also speaking to me about how to treat the people I live with, how to treat the people I love, how to treat the women I sponsor, how to treat my partner. And then there's a lovely set of promises here that says there is no situation too difficult or no unhappiness too great to be overcome. And I have found that to be true. My relationships with my family, with my partner, with with my community, with my neighbors have all certainly benefited. And so I will pass it back to David there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lee. It's really good to be here with you. And for any of you guys that have listened to the We Do Recover series, if you haven't, that can be found on YouTube. The first 7 chapters are pretty in depth from the title. Well, no, the title page all the way up to 164, actually. So, a good friend of mine that I listen to a lot, and she's probably not here today, but her name is Paige, and she is from Canada. And Paige, if you ever hear this, just know that I love you, that I've gotten so much out of her shares in the big book. One of the things she does is she calls it the bounce around, and she'll kind of bounce around in the big book to correspond one page with another, kind of like Lee did there. And so I want to do that as well as we move through these first 4 and then, look at experience and strength and hope as well. So if you have your books there, and we're to the chapter to the wives, it says this: with few exceptions, our book thus far has spoken of men. And now we know that to be truth because Dr. Silkworth, Bill and Bob, Ebby and Roland, there's a guy that's mentioned in Bill's story named Shep C. Seeper Graves, the 2 men that came to court. One of those men was Roland Hazard that helped Ebby, and Ebby in turn helped Bill. But then we see a man by the name of Hank Parkhurst in the beginning of the book. Fitz Mayo, we'll be looking at him some more as we go through this. There's the Jaywalker, there's Jim, there's Fred. So thus far, the book has mostly spoke of men. But our book says what we have said applies quite as much to women. So where have we seen that before in the big book? If we'll turn back, if you'll hold your page and jump back to page 33 for just a second, we'll drop in on the bottom paragraph, and it says this: to be gravely effective, one does not necessarily have to drink a long time nor take the quantity some of us have. Now, I know for a lot of old timers in Alcoholics Anonymous, especially when I came in, they believed that if you didn't drink the way that they drank, if you hadn't been through the troubles that you had been through, that you probably weren't alcoholic. But if you've read the big book very well, you know that that is not the truth. And it's telling us this here again. And it says this is particularly true of women. Potential female alcoholics or addicts often turn into the real thing and are gone beyond recall in a few years. Now, we know that we are beyond human aid to begin with, but that really sums it up for us. Certain drinkers who would be greatly insulted if called alcoholic are astonished in their ability to stop. And that's absolutely where most of us are when we come here. No matter what fellowship we're in, we see that our ability to stop, even after getting into recovery, going to the meetings, starting the steps, doing the steps, is that this beast seems to have all the power. But there's good news here. It does not. There's one who has all power, and that one is God. So back to page 104. It says our activities in behalf of women who drink are on the increase. There is, and look at this beautiful promise, there is every evidence that women regain their health as readily as men, but there's a condition: if they try our suggestions. So where have we seen that before in the big book? Again, it's not the bounce around like my friend Paige, but it's the jump around. So if you know your Roman numerals, which I don't very well, I'm going to say XX, but I'm pretty sure it's Roman numeral 20. If we will jump back to there in the big book, we're going to see where AA grew by leaps and bounds. I'll give us just a second to get there, but it says AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were 2 principal reasons. One, the large number of recoveries and reunited homes. Oh man, what a beautiful promise. What a principal reason. These made their impressions of everywhere, of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried. Now, remember back on page 104, we just look at that. Our activities in behalf of women who drank, there's every evidence they regain their health if they try. So those who came to AA and really tried, 50% of them got sober at once and remained at. What a beautiful, beautiful promise that is. I don't know about you, but that's good news for a guy like me. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and of the remainder that stayed on with AA showed improvement. Now, I'm not a mathematician, and I'm sorry to say I never really finished high school. I went to work as a young man, but I'm pretty sure that's 75% of recovery. Now, I don't know what it is in your town today, but I can promise you in my town, it's not 75%. Be lucky if it's 10. So if they try the suggestions, this way of life is outlined in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps, then they regain their health as readily as any of us men. I know wonderful women that are on this meeting today. My wife, who is a long-term member of Alcoholics Anonymous, 27, 28 years sober, and practices it in every way, in a way that I could only hope to someday. So the next paragraph says, but for every man who drinks, others are involved. And Lee hit on that. If you jump to page 18 in the book, there's a little inventory there that we can do for ourselves. I don't really do this with men. I really follow the highness method of the big book today. So I don't do this, but in the past I have. And if you'll look at these questions and kind of reflect on them or either write them down, it can be very powerful because this is talking about untreated alcoholism. And it's talking about this sort of illness, and we've come to believe in an illness involves those about us in a way no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him. And I can attest to that. I had a cousin that was 47 years old. He developed liver cancer. He was sober a year more than me. And everybody was so sorry and sad the day that he died, and even while he was sick. But at 25 years sober, I found myself at emotional bottom with lust and sexual acting out, holding secrets, telling lies, breaking hearts, just dominated by the sex addiction. And I can promise you, no one was sorry about that deal. With my cousin, it says there no one was angry or hurt. Everyone was angry or hurt with me. And so, not so with the illness, because there is all annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs, anytime I seen that word, it's like a big fire that just spreads, that engulfs all over everybody whose life is around me. And I don't have to be drinking or doing drugs for that to happen. I can be absolutely without any chemicals in my body. And so that's the sad news of this illness. And it brings misunderstanding. Boy, that could be wrote about for a long time. Fierce resentment. That could be financial insecurity. Oh my God. Disgust of friends, employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives. Man, I could talk all day about sad wives and blameless children and even parents. So, we will look at these things in depth as we go through this chapter. So back to 104. It says the wife who trembles in fear of the next debauch, the mother and father who see their son wasting away. I've seen this firsthand with both of my sons. Today they're both sober, clean and sober by the grace of God. But opioid and heroin addiction dominated our family for a long time. And even as a recovered member, so there were times I didn't know what the hell to do. I just didn't know what to do because I kept trying to fix the problem. I kept trying to throw money at the problem. I kept threatening the problem. I kept doing all of these things, but those things don't work. And we know that all too well. So among us are wives, relatives, and friends with whom the problem has been solved. What a beautiful, beautiful promise. Now we've seen that again. If you got a minute just to jump back to page 17 in the book, we've seen that on the very first paragraph of there is a solution. Now, when I read this chapter, it really introduces me to two powers. There's a power of the fellowship to support me and the power of the spiritual experience to transform me. But the very first paragraph says this: we of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Now, if you read his story, you've seen about the quicksand stretching all around him. He had met his match. He'd been overwhelmed. Alcohol had become his master. No words could tell of the loneliness and despair. This was the hopelessness of Bill. And it says here, nearly all have recovered, not recovering. They have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. And back here on 104, It's just kind of a recap of that as well. Among us are wives, relatives, and friends whose problem has been solved. Really, there's only one problem, and that's the self, as the book describes it. Now, the dog is always the same, but the fleas change often. And I call the fleas addiction. There's the sex addiction, lust addiction, food addiction, anger addiction, alcohol, drugs. Those are the fleas, but the dog never changes. And so the problem is always the same. It's the self. And on page 52 of the big book, it says, when we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance on the spirit of the universe, we had to quit doubting the God idea. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. So it says, as well as some of us have not yet found a happy solution. Do you remember the man of 30 back on page 33? Let's jump there for just a second. Here was a man, and if you've ever read the book, Cessation of Drinking was written by a man named Richard Peabody. And this is where Bill got this story. Now, Peabody, Bill, and Lois attended meetings at the Calvary Mission in New York City. And I was fortunate to get to go there this year when I went to New York with my wife on vacation. My good friend Joe V., who is a cab driver over there, he's a member of our lineage. Joe picked us up and took us around, and we got to go see Towns Hospital, but we got to go see the old Calvary Mission. So about a block away from the Calvary Mission, there was a guy named Richard Peabody, and he was helping to what they called in that day heal alcoholics. And he's the author of the book Cessation for Drinking. So if you ever get a chance to pick that up. And a lot of his sayings are found in the big book, like half measures availeth nothing. It came from that book. Bill, like any good alcoholic, would steal those things. I've done that before, haven't you? Whenever I talk, complete surrender. But on page 123 of his book, Cessation and Drinking, is a story about a man of 30. And so if you've read this story, or if you know anything about this story, here is a man who sobered up for 25 years. He never touched another drop. And key words here is he fell victim to a belief. He didn't just fall out drunk. He fell victim to a belief. He believed after his long period of sobriety and self-discipline, he could drink like other men. He took the drink. That triggered the allergy within his body. He was off and gone. He tried to throw money at the problem. He tried to do all these things, and he was dead within 4 years. So when we're back on 104, we see where some have not yet found a happy solution. That is a place in the book where it is worth looking at and reading if you haven't done that before. So our book says we want the wives of Alcoholics Anonymous to address the wives of men who drink too much. I don't think it's only our duty, it's our responsibility to do that with the next person. So what they say will apply to nearly everyone bound by the ties of blood and affection to the alcoholic. So as wives of alcoholics, we would like you to feel that we understand as perhaps few can. And again, page 17 would be our jump back to that. We want to analyze mistakes we have made, not only confess them, but first I want to analyze them. How do we do that? Well, I know in the 4-step inventory, that is where we analyze the mistakes we have made. Where have we seen that at before? So if you'll just jump back to page 67 for just a second, we're going to look at the second to the last paragraph, which we call the turnarounds. And it says this, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done, that was column 2. We resolutely look for all mistakes. Thank God it didn't say part. If I got a part, you got a part. But it doesn't say that. It says we're going to analyze the mistakes we have made. And back here it says the same thing again. 104, we want to analyze the mistakes we've made. We want to leave you with the feeling that no situation is too difficult and no unhappiness too great to be overcome. What a beautiful promise for people like us. I was dying at 25 years sober, dying from untreated alcoholism, which led to sex addiction and all other kinds of problems. And by the grace of God, I've been restored from that. I've been redeemed. My marriage has been saved. I have a beautiful life today with my wife, our home, everything that I've ever worked for, and things that I wanted. I would see men, good men in AA that were living the life of a disciplined man, and I wanted that, but I couldn't do it. And the problem is, I knew how to do it. I just couldn't do it. But today, after getting with another man a few years ago and going back through the highness method of the book, what a beautiful experience that I had coupled with the other things that I'd had through the years as far as recovery goes, I found freedom from that, and I am so grateful for it. So I know I've talked a lot here. I've spoken a lot. I don't want to kill all the time, so I want to pass it back to my friend to let her share if she would like to. So, Lee.
Thank you, David. It's always an education. Thank you so much. A couple things that you said. You brought up the word solution a couple times, and there's where it says among us, our wives, relatives, and friends whose problems have been solved. And that implies there is a solution, and there is a chapter called There is a Solution. And among us are also those who have not yet found that happy solution. So that's good news for everyone, that there is a solution to be had. Maybe not so good news is that the solution is in the 12 steps. And you talked about, let me see, you went back to that little part on page 18. That reminds me, that paragraph on misfortune, understanding, resentment, financial security, disgusted friends and employers. That hurts to hear that. It really does. Warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Those are the people whose lives are affected, and that's how they're affected. And that little paragraph and that description reminds me of the bedevilments on page 52 and how they experience the resentment, the financial insecurity, the disgust, the disdain, while at the same time we are experiencing difficulty with personal relations and all the things, the bedevilments that are described on page 52. I am not a big book technician. I can't quote it, but it just sprung to mind. We couldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. Those things all affect the family. And if you're a family member who has an alcoholic, you can probably identify with both sides of that description. We would like you to feel that we understand as perhaps few can. That is exactly the sentiment, the desire, the intention that was in my heart and my mind every time I walked into a 12-step meeting of several different fellowships. I wanted to feel that others understood me as nobody else could. As the adult child of an alcoholic, I went to those types of fellowship meetings because my family didn't understand. My doctor, my therapist didn't understand, but there was this collection of people for fun and for free who did understand as probably few others could. We want to analyze mistakes we've made. Analyzing those mistakes we've made is a bulk of the work that we do in recovery. I think I'm going to pass it back to David. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lee. I don't really know any more than I could add than what you did and what we have already, other than, in that third paragraph, where again it talks about whom the problem has been solved. If you remember on page 85, this is after we have looked at, the directions for our 10th step. And we've started these as a practice, a way of life. The promise there, and, I'll just kind of read it. It says, we react sanely and normally. We'll find this has happened automatically. We'll see that our new attitude toward liquor, lust, whatever it may be, it's been given us. It's a gift. I didn't do anything other than show up and do the work that was recommended. It says without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. Now, those are powerful words because that's not talking about me being placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected from lust and alcohol and drugs and food, is talking to me about being placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected from a mental state that drives me to do those things, to be recovered from a hopeless state of mind as a result of the work that we do in having a spiritual awakening. That's how I've been protected. And so, but it says, we have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem, and it's the same thing it said on page 104, the problem has been removed. Well, if alcohol is not the problem, lust and all of those things are not the problem, then what the hell's the problem? Because that definitely seems to be the problem for me. I mean, ask my wife what the problem was, and I guarantee she would have told you that it was something much deeper than what I was seeing on the surface. But see, I didn't know that. And I read another book a lot, and it talks about the dark principalities of this world. We're not fighting flesh and blood. That is the dark principalities. And the big book is saying the same thing in so many words, not those same words. But if you go to page 62 for just a second, we see that page 60 leading up to this really talked about this condition of mind known as self. This is what's driving me to do the things I do. And my medication for the problem becomes alcohol, lust, drugs, whatever it may be. But that's far from being the problem, because if that's the problem, the only thing I need to do is not do that anymore, and I won't have a problem anymore. But the problem seems to get worse when I quit doing that. See, I think sobriety is the solution to my alcoholism, my drug addiction. But the problem with that is I'm sober every time I relapse. So if sobriety is the solution, I already had it before I relapsed. Why did I relapse? That brings on a whole new set of questions. So if you look at page 62, it says, and we all know this, most of us all too well, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root. See, not alcohol, not lust, not drugs, not sex. Self. And it says driven. I'm a truck driver. I drive a semi for a large corporation, and I'm usually the man behind the wheel. But if I'm being driven, there's somebody else behind the wheel. That's not me. I'm along for the ride for damn sure, and I'm participating in all the activities that is going on during the drive, but I'm not the one doing the driving. I'm being driven. And this is what I'm being driven by: 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity, all of these things. If you read that a little further down, it says we, and if you circle that word, have made decisions based on self. And if you circle that word, which later put us, and if you circle that word, you will see that that's not the same. That's what I've identified as. But by the grace of God and the rest of this work, this is not who I am. This is who I became based on a narrative that lived within. It was the enemy that was lying to me. I was accepting it as truth. I was taking actions based on it, and I was in all kinds of hell. So if you're relapsing over and over and over and over, and you can't seem to get sobriety, take a closer look at the real problem. So when I see that, the problem has been solved. There's so many places that connects us to the work that we do here. And if we do this work, man, what a happy solution that turns out to be, or it has for me. Now, I've taken a pretty good beating to get to there, and I knew this before and fell back. So I'm not under the illusion anymore that if I don't stay in the confines of steps 10 and 11, the way that they're outlined in the book as a new way to live, that I won't fall back to sleep and do that again. I promise you I will. That's been my experience over and over and over. But by the grace of God, that hasn't happened in some time. And so I keep it in the day. Each day I wake up, the first thing I do is connect with God, a loving God. I ask Him to create in me a clean heart, renew me with a steadfast spirit, give me pure motives and honest desires, clean thoughts. And I know throughout the day I'm not going to live up to that, but I sure as hell try to aim at it in steps 6 and 7. And as a result of that, my life has changed. Everybody has told me, David, I see a quiet strength now. My wife tells me all the time, you're not the same guy you was even a year ago. And I don't know, used to, I just, oh yeah, man, that's wonderful, big hugs all around now. No, I know it's by the grace of a loving God that these things have happened. The self is definitely way, way more smart than I am. I'm no match upside of that without a loving God. So this chapter will point over and over again to the problem, to the solution, to the problem. But if you read it with just the naked eye, you're going to see a whole lot of problem here. But I don't see that. I see it a little bit deeper than that. And I'm very, very grateful for that. So that's that's the first four paragraphs. I don't know if you've ever read those very carefully, but there is a whole lot of meat there. And I know that as we go through the rest of this study, we'll be looking at this more of the same. We'll be looking at it bouncing around, jumping around in the big book. We'll be looking at experience, strength, and hope. Because hell, I mean, anybody could just read a book and talk about it. But, what I try to do in these studies is really bring to the surface my experience, mainly with the failures that I've made. I just don't want to talk and make everybody think that, oh my God, it's so wonderful, because I did that for so long and I was silently struggling on the inside, which always led me back to relapse with lust. And so today, I want to analyze, I want to look at self. There's a one little sentence that strikes me there at the end of more about alcoholism in that chapter, and it's on page 29, last paragraph. We hope no one will consider these self-revealing. Notice the little s in front of self. We're talking about that part of us. But if you turn that word around, it says revealing self. And basically, that's what we do through the work. And in these later chapters, we definitely want to continue to do that. We don't want to take our foot off the gas here, because if we do, I don't know about you, but an alcoholic like me, if I'm not studying these back chapters and learning how to practice these principles in my home, with my wife, with my employer, which we'll look at here in the near future, if I don't have a vision for helping others, the family afterward, the family after the spiritual experience, if I'm not practicing these things, then I'm destined to fall back into my old way of life. That's been my experience. So I know we've only got a couple of minutes left. Lee, do you want to say anything else, or we can pass it back to Rob? But that's all for me today. Thank you all. Appreciate you.
Thank you, David. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think I'm all set. We can pass it back to Rob.